What did the process of unparalyzing yourself look like for you?
Absolute agony. Let me be clear about this. I did not snap my fingers and all of a sudden I was healthy. Quite the contrary. Focus, intention, energy, determination, will, commanding all of myself through absolute brutal agony is what it took. Now I share that so every human being understands the mindset of total victory. I would do it all again.
How does self-realization work?
Yeah, great question. Okay, the self-realization is destructive, not constructive.
I'm here today with RJ Spina, who is a metaphysical teacher and healer who has had a profound experience of healing himself from paralysis and chronic disease. And we're going to learn more about his story and his wisdom today. Thank you so much for joining me, RJ.
It's my pleasure, Melissa. Thank you for having me.
Likewise. I would love to hear a little bit of your backstory. So I've heard you speak about how you had astral projection experiences as a child. So it sounds like you've had a spiritual connection from a young age, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about how that started for you.
Sure. Yeah, my earliest memories are actually of me being out of my body. It started when I was a child, and I can remember it would start with my body would be on the bed, and my consciousness, or what I really am, my sentience, would be, quote unquote, standing next to the bed looking at myself. Then I would be up on the ceiling. And then I can remember the very beginning stages of that, of wondering if I could crawl on the ceiling, my consciousness could crawl on the ceiling into other rooms of my parents' house. And then it graduated to being up on the roof of my parents' house. And then at that point, I started to realize that just my intention to go somewhere, my consciousness would just go somewhere. And then that led to the local mountaintops where I grew up. And then it was literally into different frequencies and different dimensions and different realities that I now understand. I have enough of developed an intellect enough to deconstruct what I was doing naturally as a child. But yeah, absolutely. I came into this incarnation very, I would say, detached from the body, or really even from the human experience, because it's our identification which forms the attachment to the body, and which then reduces us to body consciousness, which is what I call it, which then turns off all the awareness and abilities and wisdom of who and what we really are, which is the I am, the direct fractal of God. And so it was totally normal, and it was daily, and it was multiple times a day that I would just do that. And it was really just through sort of that state that you're in just before you're about to fall asleep, when you're very, very relaxed. And then I also realized that even if my intention wasn't to sleep, if I would just kind of sit down, or sometimes even lie down, but not with the agenda of sleeping, but if I just got very relaxed, I would just all of a sudden be out of my body. And those really are the first memories that I have in this lifetime are of me being out of my body.
Wow, amazing. So you said that you saw different frequencies, dimensions, and realities. Are you able to explain or share some of those things? I know sometimes they can be beyond language.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely meant to be experienced. That's for sure. In fact, that is the point of everything, is for the tangible experience, which is where the actual gnosis or understanding of the immortal, unlimited self actually comes from, is the tangibility of things. But excuse me, I would say that different frequencies, different realities, different dimensions. We could use let's use a radio or TV. Maybe TV is better for this one. Think of a television. Now with satellite TV, there's literally like thousands of channels, right? Okay, so, but you can only watch one at a time, right? So if we start to think that the body, the physical, so-called physical body, is attuned to and part of the local environment. So that means we're kind of limited to one reality that we can experience. And that's the reality that our body is part of and attuned to. Now, just like you flip the channel or your remote, you change the channel on your television, and there's thousands of channels, there's thousands of shows, there's thousands of realities that are happening right now. They're just on different frequencies or different wavelengths. And that's kind of how the multiversal structure or the greater reality actually works. It's all in the same place. You could think of like a rubber band ball, and all those rubber bands being different timelines. And they're all in the same space. They're all interconnected. They're all touching one another and informing one another, but they're all in the same space. So when we change the channel on our television, we're taking in a whole different program, a whole different reality. And that's kind of what different frequencies, parallel conditions, different realities is like. I wouldn't necessarily say different dimensions, because once you get out of the first full dimension, there is no more physical reality in terms of a human perspective. But it's literally like just changing the dial or changing the channel, and all of a sudden it's a completely different program. It's a completely different reality. And as I said, the body, our physical body, is attuned to this one, but what you really are is attuned to everything and part of everything. And so when we sort of go within and work directly with who and what we really are, we can experience the different frequencies and different realities. Some are similar to the one that we're experiencing, Melissa. Some are nothing like what our experience of physical reality or Earth is, and everything in between. So it is kind of like tapping into your satellite television and thousands of stations, thousands of realities, various frequencies, and various parallel conditions. And they're all actually within our consciousness. We have, from my perspective, I believe we have it a bit backwards. We think it's out there. God is within your consciousness. There are many rooms within my Father's house. And today, from a metaphysical perspective, we can now understand these things as different frequencies, dimensions, and realities that are within your consciousness or your higher mind.
Is that because consciousness is creating these different realities?
What a great question. Okay, yes and no. So what an annoying answer. Okay, so let's look at it this way. My direct experience is that all these different realities, frequencies, just like the TV, those stations, those programs are playing right now. So when we tune to it, we're not really creating it. It's already there. So I would say my experience is that what we're doing, if we can remove the idea, and I know this is very trippy, but if we can remove the idea of no such thing as movement, just go with me for a second. If we remove the idea that there's no such thing as movement, but what is shifting is perception. Perception is shifting. And sometimes that shift in perception is a different shift in frequency band, or going up in frequency. So to me, what it's really more like is that we're moving through all this multiversal structure, which is already built based upon our perception. And when I say perception, we could also think of it as our level of self-awareness or our level of self-realization, which opens up the higher mind, and it gives us the ability to move through, but we're shifting our perception into these different realities and frequencies by raising our frequency and opening up our higher mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. So I'm sure we'll come back to this because there's so much that we could dive into here with the topic of consciousness and frequencies. But I would love to hear a little bit more about your personal journey. So what was it like being a child and having this expanded awareness?
Well, I mean, for the longest time, I thought it was normal and universal, because it was certainly normal for me. And it wasn't until I think I was about 5, give or take. And I remember asking my mom, where do you go when you go to sleep or when you relax? Like where do you go within outer space? And so she just looked at me like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, where do you travel? Who do you interact with? Like, where do you go? She's like, I don't go anywhere. In fact, I don't even remember half the time when I go to sleep. So it was really up until that moment, I thought that is what everyone did, or that's what everyone experienced. So up until that time, I thought this was just totally and utterly normal. And then at that point, I realized that it wasn't normal. And I always just had this deep, deep sense of being connected to things on literally on the deepest levels. And I always felt like I was passing through this realm for a very brief period, a human incarnation. I always felt I was just traveling through here, that I had work to do here, and I would do the work, and then I would leave and return home. But it was normal for me, but as it turns out, it wound up being highly unusual for everybody else.
Right. That's fascinating. Okay, so at a certain point, something happened to where you were paralyzed and you were also dealing with chronic health issues. Could you share with us how that came about in your life?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you like what you're hearing on this podcast? For just $10 a month, you can join Love Car Life Academy, where you'll have access to our exclusive community chat and our weekly live streams, where we answer your most pressing questions and deep dive into your spiritual practice. You don't have to be alone on this journey. Come join us. We would love to have you.
It was April 23rd, 2016. I became permanently, air quotes, permanently paralyzed from the chest down. I was diagnosed with severe sepsis. I was told I had 48 hours to live. And I was also diagnosed with multiple chronic diseases, including type 1 diabetes, Hashimoto's autoimmune disease, hypothyroidism. I'm probably forgetting some, by the way. There was a page of things that were just drastically wrong with me. I was told to make out a will, that it was very unlikely I'd even live for another 48 hours. And I had something called a laminectomy. And a laminectomy is where, for me, they had to scrape off this infection that had compressed and crushed my spine, causing chest down paralysis. So they performed this laminectomy. I woke up the next morning from this emergency surgery, and Melissa, I woke up in a state of cosmic consciousness. Like, I literally remembered how self-healing works. I literally remembered how self-realization or enlightenment works. It's a metaphysical process that anyone can go under. And I started explaining in the ICU even the actual steps that one needs to take in order to self-heal and also become self-realized. And I predicted and filmed it, recorded it. I predicted that I would walk unassisted in 100 days, even though I was told it's absolutely impossible. There's no way you can do it. I said all my other health issues would be resolved, that I actually understand how healing works. And I knew no one would believe me. I knew that. So I made sure that the nurses, some of the physical therapists, and even some of the doctors would film me as I was unparalyzing myself. And there's a video of that. Everything is time-stamped. You can see an MRI on my spine. This really happened. And I really did unparalyze myself in exactly 100 days, exactly as I said that I would. And these teachings are what make up the foundation of my first book, Supercharged Self-Healing, which I just found out just went into its 9th printing, which is absolutely incredible. Wow. Absolutely incredible. And since then, those teachings in the first book have helped. I mean, I don't know what the number is, probably in the hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people lead a better life, not just with their physical issues, but emotional and mental. And it all came back, Melissa. It was like a muscle memory. And as a kid, I used to say, if I ever get sick, I'll just heal myself, which is a bizarre thing to say. But I was already remembering what was about to happen later on in my life. And I still kind of can't believe that I get to be here still and teach what it is that I understand. And it's an honor, and it's a privilege, and it's my love, and it's my passion. And it's also an awesome responsibility. But I couldn't be more grateful to be here and to be here with you right now.
Well, thank you for being here and for doing this and teaching this. I would love to ask you, so when you woke up in that cosmic consciousness, you remembered how self-healing works and how self-realization works. Are those two separate processes?
Yeah, I would say they are. They're not. There's cross-pollination. They're certainly related to one another, but one can absolutely be self-realized or enlightened and not necessarily have the technical know-how of how to put the body back together. And believe it or not, vice versa. One may have the technical know-how to move the energy properly and raise frequency and not necessarily be enlightened. There's been many enlightened beings, that died of cancer and that died of other these things. Now, they might have had the ability to heal themselves, but they also might not have seen the point which is interesting, right? Might not have seen the point in doing so. And I think just for me, because I can only speak for me, is that healing I feel is a very old skill set that I have, and that it came back to me when it was most needed, because my body was destroyed. I mean, it was it was pretty abysmal. Right? There was no chance of getting better and all this kind of stuff. So the remembering came back online, but they're not necessarily the exact same thing, but there is some cross-pollination and there's some synergy between the two, but not technically the same thing.
Okay, interesting. And that's a really good side point about some of the masters didn't heal themselves. And I think in some cases, maybe it was even because the sickness or the suffering in their body was almost intentional to take on some of the karma of their disciples. I think of, because I read Autobiography of a Yogi by Yogananda, and he would talk about things like that and how his master did that.
What a great point and great insight. Absolutely. You're brilliant, Melissa. Yeah, absolutely. So very, very, very evolved or advanced, and those are not the same thing. We'll just use the word master. Let's just use the word master. It's easier. Real authentic masters can absolutely do that. And they also understand that if it's not part of their life plan to heal themselves, they wouldn't even bother. They wouldn't even bother, because why would they alter their own plan? Right? So I would just say for me, it was within my life plan to actually put my destroyed body back together, because I've done it before in other incarnations, so I actually know how to do it. So it was actually part of my life plan. But for some mystics and masters and yogis, it's actually not part of their life plan, and therefore there's no compulsion to actually go ahead and do that. They're going to stick with their plan of when it is that they're going to leave their body, which same with me, but just part of it along the way was the challenge of putting it all back together. At some point, I'll certainly leave my body. I just wasn't going to do it then. I needed to prove to myself yet again that I could put a destroyed body back together and then share those teachings and that information with humanity.
Right. Yeah, that makes so much sense. So how does self-healing work?
Well, I wrote a whole book on that, but I would say how I describe it in the simplest terms, Melissa, it is the deconstruction of the false self.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the simplest, and obviously there's a whole book worth of information. But when we attune, and we'll keep it simple, because otherwise I will ramble for an hour. You probably know that. Okay, so when we attune this suit or body mind to what we are, which is the direct fractal of God, which is perfection itself, which is immortal, which is whole and complete. When we're able to attune body mind to that, the body mind complex automatically begins to heal itself. Now that takes, and I wrote a whole Ascend the Frequencies healing technique, the actual process of doing this, but it starts with detachment from identification with the suit, with thoughts, with emotions, with bodily sensations, with bodily experiences. It starts with the detachment from that and the inner recognition that you are something much more, and you're the awareness. You're like this time-lapse camera that is untouched by everything that has ever gone on. And then once you start to tangibly experience that, you get separation from the identification with body consciousness. And through the separation and detachment from the identification with body consciousness, that's the deconstruction of the false self. You no longer see yourself as the suit, your collection of your beliefs, the collection of all your thoughts, the collection of all your bodily experiences, sensations, so-called knowledge. There's a moment in authentic cosmic consciousness where all so-called knowledge and ignorance are seen as the exact same thing, and they literally just fall away from you. And in that moment, you know what you are. And in that moment, that unlimited nature takes over. And that's when you can actually put your body, anything is wrong with you, you can actually put it right back together as you deem fit.
Well, thank you so much for breaking that down. So in previous interviews, I have heard you talk about the two, like the juxtaposition between these two seemingly opposite things, where it's almost sounds like like the intention to be healed contrasted with the surrender of letting go of the fact that you're not experiencing that in the physical body and holding those two things at the same time.
Yeah, you tuned right into the core of the matter without a doubt, Melissa. Okay, so now what I'll explain is something that the ego mind or human character cannot do. It cannot do. Okay, the human mind can't hold two seemingly opposite truths at the same time. It would cause cognitive dissonance, and the human mind would shut down and only be able to operate with one of them. Okay, so what we really are, the mighty I am, the fractal of God, is everything. It has room for everything and for everyone. So being able to hold two truths simultaneously is nothing for who and what we really are. Okay, so the key to that understanding, from my perspective, is to harness all of your desire and intention with a single pointedness of focus, right? So all your attention and energy is geared towards the manifestation of one goal, and for me was to walk, obviously, right? So everything, all of my energy, all of my focus was going in that direction. Now, the knowingness is that fruition of that goal is already within me, just as the tree is in the seedling, right? The butterfly is in the caterpillar. So the healing is within me, and I'm well aware of that. Now, this is where it becomes impossible for the ego mind identity. The ego mind identity never has any peace. And even once it achieves its so-called goal, it's immediately onto what's next. It's immediately onto what's next. Okay. Now the real you is at peace right now. It's at peace right now with everything and everyone. So it is to be at peace while simultaneously harnessing your desire and intention, your will, with a single pointedness of focus. But if you're already at peace, you can actually enjoy the process, and you're not looking for a result because you're at peace right now, even though you're working towards a goal. Now, our ego mind, when it's working towards a goal, it has no peace until the goal is achieved. This is the opposite. To be at peace now while having the intention to achieve something. Now, the real you can do that. This little human intellect cannot. And this is why I feel that there's so much, one of the reasons why there's so much struggle with healing is because we're not healing from the place, from the I am. We're trying to heal from the ego mind's perspective. And the ego mind is actually why we have illness. So it's like asking cancer to cure itself. So we have to go further within, reside as the I am, which is total peace, and then harness our energy towards something. So it's just like you're riding to the store and you set your GPS. You know you're going to get there. Enjoy the ride, as an analogy. So when we're able to do that, that's when the superhuman is born, because that's when the big you has conquered the little you, and now the impossible is on the table for everyone to be able to achieve.
When you said the words, you know you're going to get there, so enjoy the ride, I think that's when it really clicked for me what that state of consciousness feels like.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the healing is within you. Your self-realization is within you. The manifestation of every desire is within you. The tree is in the seed. Now, when we can rest and do in that knowingness, then we actually can enjoy the ride, and we can be at peace the whole time. And that, I feel, is one of the major paradigm shifts that we have to make for human beings to start to truly ascend the frequencies. Because if we're attached to any kind of outcome, if we're attached to anything here, if we're attached to any experience, that is your energy that is actually stuck and attached. And just like Spider-Man shooting a spider web, he shoots it at a building. He's stuck to that building. Where is he going? He's not going anywhere. So if we identify or attach even to a result, we can't go anywhere. And that's the whole be at peace and enjoy the ride while creating, while in the act of creating. And this will liberate humanity and bring about the next advanced civilization that we're going to have.
I love that. And I think a lot of people might get stuck on the, how do I not be attached to the outcome of having perfect health, while also directing all of my energy towards creating that.
Yeah, that's an easy place to get stuck because it's not complicated, as we've just talked about. It's not complicated, but it is certainly not easy when we're incarnate here in the lower frequencies. We have to start to realize what we were just saying about the desire and the manifestation of that desire is already within you, right? And so when we say to ourselves, whatever I desire is given, we can start to understand that they come from the same place. You can actually start to feel it. You can actually start to feel it. So when we realize that we're whole and complete as we are, and all we're doing is bringing out more who we are, and it's internal. And when we realize it's internal and not external, we won't be attached to an outcome because the fulfillment of the desire is already within you. It's already there. We just have to put our attention upon it and remove everything else that's in the way. Now, when you're attached, that's your energy. You're leaking power. Your energy is your power, right? So we don't want to be attached to anything or anyone or any outcome or any expectation or any rumination, because that is your energy. That is your power. So if we're attached to anything, we're tying both our hands behind our back, right? We're losing our power. When we can tangibly realize that the manifestation of the desire is already within you, and then by simply accessing more of you, it then shows itself into physical reality. And there's nothing to be attached to because you're already it.
Right. Yeah, I'd love to ask your perspective on this because I grew up Christian, and then I spent most of my teenage years in the charismatic Word of Faith movement, which I don't know how familiar you are with that, but there's a huge emphasis on physical healing, supernatural healing, and the groups that I was involved in was very like trying to help people understand how to have faith for healing, like how to believe that this healing belongs to you. And I experienced some healings myself. I saw a lot of other people experience healings, but probably even more people who didn't. And from my perspective now, I think it's because it was so mind focused, like focused on you need to have the right belief and you need to say the right things. And for myself, when I experienced a healing, it was a lot more of what you're talking about, of entering into a state of consciousness where I just already know that this is my reality.
You nailed it. You nailed it. So beliefs have nothing to do with what is. Nothing.
Right.
Okay. Now, let's look at this. I agree with you 100%. Let's open it up a little bit more, okay?
Yes,
so we talk about a belief, a concept, a belief, an ideology, so-called knowledge, okay? They're all beliefs. Okay. And then it has nothing to do with what is. So if we think of water, okay, water in its natural state will just keep flowing and going. But water will also take the shape of whatever you pour it into. So if you have water, you pour it into a cup, right? It'll take the shape of a cup. You pour water into your hands, it'll take the shape of your hands. Okay. Consciousness, what we really are, which is really sentience, but consciousness in terms of what we really are is much, much, much finer than water. Our natural state is to be one with everything. Our natural state is to be one with everything. So what that means is, if we can refrain from pouring our consciousness into any container, this belief, that belief, this concept, that concept, this so-called set of knowledge, if we can refrain from pouring our consciousness into a container, the oneness and the connectivity and the communion with all existence, including your own higher self and God, will be tangibly known. And at that point, there's absolutely no limitations, none whatsoever. So putting a destroyed body back together is no big deal. And I mean it. It's no big deal. When Roger Bannister, who was the 4-minute mile was considered impossible. Absolutely impossible. Don't bother trying. It's humanly impossible. No one can ever do it. It's never going to happen. Then, of course, Roger Bannister, who, by the way, explained while he was running, felt like he was being propelled by love. He broke the 4-minute barrier. He did the impossible, humanly impossible. It can't be done, right? Well, guess what? As soon as he did it, 6 weeks later, someone else did it. Because once someone does it, it gives the collective consciousness a permission slip for them to do it themselves. And since then, over 20,000 people have run a sub 4-minute mile, including high school students. We're going to start to realize that me unparalyzing myself is your permission slip to do the impossible for yourself as well. That's because there's no such thing as impossible, because it is all one thing. And when you don't pour your consciousness into a belief, a concept, an ideology, or an experience, the oneness will be tangibly known. And if it's all one thing, nothing is off limits, including unparalyzing yourself or speaking directly with God. It's all on the table. And this, when we start to work in this way, nothing will be able to stop a human being.
I love that analogy that you made with the 4-minute mile. And I'd like to ask you, for people listening, when you were going through the process of unparalyzing yourself, because in the physical, it's things are more of a process. What did that look like, practically speaking, for you?
Agony. Absolute agony. Let me be clear about this. I did not snap my fingers and all of a sudden I was healthy. Quite the contrary. The amount of focus, intention, energy, determination, will, and commanding all of myself through absolute brutal agony is what it took. I mean, it was brutal. The rekindling the dead nerves, reigniting the pathways down my spine and down my legs were levels of pain that I didn't think even existed. And I don't talk about it too much. That's what it took. I was not going to be denied. And I'll give an example. The gentleman who wrote the foreword for the first book, Supercharged Self-Telling, his name is Adrian. He was my only guest in the hospital rehab. I was there for 2 months or so. And he was witnessing the healing that was, impossible. And he was assisting it. And he's like, I got to write the foreword for the book because no one is going to believe this is possible. I have to write it. I said, yeah, absolutely sure. So after I got discharged, there was still paralysis. I wasn't walking completely on my own except for a couple more weeks after that. It was exactly on the 100th day. But the point is, he came over to see me while I was at my house. And my partner at the time actually needed back surgery. She was literally on the floor, couldn't take care of herself. We had 2 dogs. I was in no physical condition. After getting 24/7 round-the-clock care for 2 months, I was literally dumped off at my house. I wasn't ready to take care of myself physically. I certainly wasn't ready to take care of another person as well as 2 dogs. I didn't really have a choice. So I was pushing my physical body far past agreed upon limitations in terms of the amount of pain I was enduring and how much I would push myself to bring life back into my body. So Adrian came over one time. And I was on a massage table and he's checking me out. He's like, listen, RJ, I know you don't want to hear it, but I got to tell you something. Your bones are so brittle from the sepsis and the amount of pressure that you're putting on you're literally about to snap your entire rib cage. You have to stop. You have to stop. My response to him was that I'm willing to break everything in order to put it back together properly. Now, I share that so every human being understands the mindset of total victory. Sometimes that is exactly what it takes. That kind of will and that kind of determination. And my healing was chock full of having to access that kind of determination and that kind of will. And when we harness ourselves properly, and our energy is our will, and it is directed from the true self, from the I am. There is absolutely nothing we can't do, but we have to face all the fears, all the pain, all the suffering, everything. Healing is incredibly lonely. It's often brutal, agonizing. It's the toughest journey we ever make, right? But if you do it properly and you harness your will and you know what's going to happen, it will.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It sounds like it was probably not a pleasant thing to go back and revisit.
It's okay. I'm detached. I'm detached from it, but I often don't. And I'm thank you for asking, because I want that message loud and clear too, that sometimes it's going to be agonizing. It's going to be brutal. There were levels of pain I didn't know it existed. It was that pain. My body used to just convulse. like this. It would just start shaking. He would try to hold my legs down. There was that much pain because I was bringing all this electricity through channeling energy through my crown chakra and into my body. I was bringing all this electricity. I mean, I could have just started screaming endlessly. That's how much I hurt. I would do it all again. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Hopefully I don't have to do it again. That once was enough. But if I had to do it again, I would endure that whole thing again. There's no question about it.
Well, thank you for sharing. And I'm going to have to get your book so I can read more of the details of that healing process. But before we run out of time today, I would like to ask you about the second thing that you saw in that cosmic consciousness state. How does self-realization work?
Well, great question. Okay. So self-realization is a destructive, not constructive process. So what does that mean? Okay, so it's not an adding on. Okay, so the ego mind identity is bankrupt. It authentically and intrinsically doesn't know anything, which is why it constantly wants more and more information because it doesn't know anything. Okay, so that's constructive, trying to add. That's the ego mind identity, just increasing its vanity. That's all that's really going on with that. Okay, self-realization is destructive. It's where everything that you have misidentified, misunderstood, and misperceived falls away. That's why I said there was a moment, I remember like it just happened, that moment where all so-called knowledge and ignorance are seen as the same thing, and it just falls away. So it's literally a letting go. No more misperceptions, no more misunderstandings, and no more misidentifications. The self is realized, self-realization. And so it is the letting go of everything that we're not. And the ego mind cannot do that because without grasping and identifying and holding on, it dies. And that's why the struggle is working with the ego mind identity. We have to let it go, and we let it go by being present and normalizing being present, because the ego mind works off of the past and future. You, the I am, is timeless. And once that's tangibly felt, that destructive process is underway. And once everything is gone, the only thing that remains is you, the self. And then the self is known. And that's what self-realization is.
Thank you so much for summing that up for us. And throughout the millennia, different spiritual teachers have basically said the same thing, and they've all had their own take on how to achieve that state of consciousness. Do you have any specific paths that you recommend for people to follow?
Yes, surrender. Now, most of us use our will, which is our energy, our will, and oftentimes it's necessary. We use it to get things done, or sometimes to fight, to take this action outwardly, right? There will come a time for everyone where the highest use of the will is not to swing the sword, but to put your shield down. That takes an incredible level of courage to completely and utterly surrender. Now, I made it easy for myself, as weird as it sounds, by having my body completely destroyed. It was completely and utterly, I couldn't even feel it. It was completely and utterly destroyed. I was in an automatic state of surrender. I couldn't do anything. So I forced my own hand by destroying my body. But the more that we can surrender, now through this surrender will come, I don't like using the word acceptance because acceptance is a contraction, allowance is the right way. But in this context, through surrender, there will be self-acceptance or acceptance of self, which is really self-love. And once we normalize this self-love, you will effortlessly be present. And this normalization of being present will eventually lead to self-realization, because the only thing that you're experiencing when you're locked in the present moment is the depth of yourself. You are now marinating within the self. The aroma of the self will waft up and inform your mind by only normalizing being present through surrender and through self-love and total acceptance. It's actually not complicated at all. At all. I'm not going to say it's easy. because that's not true. But is it complicated? Not in the least. Not in the least. In fact, when people start working with some of these teachings, they kind of can't believe how simple and profound and effective they are. That's because the truth doesn't require your participation. Lies do. And when we start to work with ourselves in the way that we just talked about, self-realization, self-healing, self-mastery, the manifestation of all of our desires, they're on the table because we're working with the unlimited nature of the true self, the fractal of God, the self with a capital S, which has absolutely no limitations.
You mentioned that there's a difference between acceptance and allowance. And I'm curious about that because a lot of spiritual teachers do talk about acceptance.
Yes. Okay. So we talk about that. All right. So let's just use, don't take my word for it, right? Let's just use the tangibility of these things. Okay. So when we say acceptance, just say it, acceptance. Now, my hands do this because acceptance creates a contraction. Acceptance creates and you can feel it. Accept. There is a reduction of who and what we are, because what we're doing is we're operating within a singular perspective of a one reality. We're agreeing to a one reality that might even be discordant by accept. Accept him or accept her or accept your situation. Well, why would you do that if it's highly discordant to you? Okay, so acceptance is a contraction. Contraction is not what is. It's an imposition on what is. Okay, so that's acceptance, spiritual buzzword. Okay, allowance, Melissa, allowance, right? Feel it, allowance, right? I talk with my hands, but this is what happens when we say allowance. You can feel it, allowance, you feel the expansion. Right? So allowance allows us to move into the infinite possible possibilities to show up within the screen of our consciousness. If you simply allow, you are not condensing and accepting a one reality, agreed upon one reality that is discordant to you. The infinite possible possibilities can now manifest within the screen of your consciousness because you're allowing it to happen. The difference between acceptance and allowance is night and day. They don't have anything to do with each other, and they're used interchangeably within the so-called spiritual community by people who don't know what they're talking about. All you have to do is feel it. Don't take my word for it. Say acceptance. Feel the contraction. Say allowance. Feel the expansion. Expansion, unlimited nature is what is. Work with allowance and forget acceptance, and your life will be able to change radically based upon how much of the self you're actually in direct connection with.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. That makes so much sense to me because something that comes up a lot, which I'm sure you're aware of, is that people who are maybe in abusive situations in their life or, some horrible situation, and then they're told you need to accept whatever comes to you. And then their automatic question is, you're saying that I have to accept this, that this abuse is okay, that I just need to stay in this situation. And that now you're pointing out that word acceptance is contracting because you're accepting something for yourself. So you're impinging upon yourself and who you are and what you can experience. And allowance, like you said, has much more of an expansive feel about it. You're allowing something to be what it is, but it doesn't have to have anything to do with you or who you are.
Well said, Melissa. And when we work with allowance, what's going to happen is that agreed upon one discordant reality, you will no longer see or experience that reality from that same singular perspective. So now all of a sudden, your life and your perception starts to change, and you're no longer most likely see yourself as a victim, right? We are never victims of circumstance. We are victims of perspective. And the greater the perspective, we'll realize that victimhood is just a concept within the unawakened mind. And that can only happen through allowance. And when we work with ourselves in that way, we will shift out of this one discordant, agreed upon personal reality into the infinite possible possibilities that actually exist within us. We will no longer see the situation from the same mindset, from the same perception. And as we said before, it's perception. We are shifting our perception. Forget movement. It's an actual illusion. I promise. We're shifting in perception. And as we shift in perception, more of who and what we are and the greater reality will be online. And therefore, the infinite possible possibilities that we can manifest and create will be back in our hands properly as an immortal creator being.
Wonderful. Well, RJ, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for having this conversation and for being willing to share from your journey and your wisdom with us. And I would like to give you a chance to share with the viewers where they can find you and anything that you have going on that you'd like them to know about.
Sure. It's been my pleasure, Melissa. Thank you for having me. Thank you. ascendthefrequencies.com. I know that's a long URL, but ascendthefrequencies.com is the website. There's a couple of books that I've written. My first book, Supercharged Self-Healing, which is now in its 9th printing, is available on Amazon. Change Your Mind, my second book, which came out last August, is now in its 4th printing. That's also available on Amazon. My third book comes out this August 8th, Access Superconsciousness, which can be pre-ordered. It's the true teachings of self-mastery. We just did an event in San Diego, the Freedom Workshop. Absolutely fantastic. We're doing another one. I'm not sure when this will air, but we're doing another workshop in Dallas towards the end of July. So that's what's next. There is a retreat that we're doing in Kauai. For those that haven't been to Kauai, it's the highest frequency on this planet, and I used to live there. We're doing a retreat in Kauai the end of May, the first week of June. And the next course that's happening is my self-mastery course, which will begin April 20th. Just come to the website, sign up for the newsletter, follow on Instagram, which is RJ Spina, Ascend the Frequencies, or my YouTube channel. And there's new content that I put out every Friday, which is also RJ Spina Ascend the Frequencies. And if anything I've said resonates or excites you, partake in some of the classes, courses, workshops, retreats. There's really nothing like it on this planet, and it will change your life in ways that you can't even imagine.
I'll have all of those links here. We'll have your website in the show notes, and then I can put your books in there. Your classes are all on your website, I assume.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much again for being willing to have this conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Melissa. It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me. We'll do it again sometime.
Sounds good. Thank you for watching and listening. Your views, likes, comments, and shares truly make the biggest difference in supporting this channel. Don't forget to check the show notes for all the links to today's guest, as well as my links. You'll find me on social media at Love Covered Life, my website, lovecoveredlife.com, and the Be a Guest link for anybody who would like to be a guest on the channel. I have great news. Love Covered Life podcast is coming available on audio podcast. You can find it wherever you listen to your audio podcasts.